Yosef Hatzadik. Who is he? There was only one answer: a born manager. As a young man, his father sent him out to the field with a nice suit, a manager's suit. Not something to shovel with. He sent him out with a suit and a clipboard to go check on his brothers. His brothers were in the field and they were involved in labor, heavy labor. And he was sent to go out and check up on them. And Joseph's human resources skills were lacking. And he made a report on the brothers that they didn't appreciate. And he had dreams about himself that he told the brothers that they didn't appreciate, and dreams about himself that he told his father, and his father didn't apparently appreciate. And they decided to do away with this troublemaker. And they threw him in a hole, and they sold him. They being his brothers. And they lied about it to their father. They brought his nice suit back to his father. They said, "Do you recognize this?" And he said, "Yes." And they deceived him and told him a wild animal had eaten Joseph. Anyway, getting back to Joseph himself, he ends up in Egypt, sold by these Ishmaelites to the house of Potiphar. Potiphar is a high-ranking Egyptian, and once again Joseph is put in charge of the house. So now once again he's in management. Everything in the house was put under Joseph's management. Joseph apparently was an extremely good-looking guy. Potiphar apparently was not taking care of his wife, and she had an eye for Joseph, and Joseph didn't want to comply, and the whole thing mushroomed up, and she falsely accuses Joseph of making advances on her, when in fact she's the one who grabbed his clothes. He goes running off without his cloak. She's like, "Look what this guy did." It's her word against his. He's in jail. But the point being was that before that happened, he rose to the top of the home. Joseph ran that house. That's 2 times. First in the field, he's in a management position. Everybody else is labor. Then, and it all revolves around a code, by the way. Second time, once again, he's in management. Everybody else is in labor. And somehow or another, over the loss of a coat, once again, he ends up in prison. And what happens in prison? Well, once again, due to a series of successful prophecies and good decisions, Joseph ends up running the prison. And the successful prophecies, since have been mentioned, are specifically Joseph's in the jail, and he comes across, and apparently this is not a common jail. This is a jail, a white-collar jail. So he comes across, he himself was the servant of a high-ranking Egyptian. He's now in the company of Pharaoh's former baker and Pharaoh's former wine steward, and they're both troubled with dreams, and Joseph successfully interprets the dreams. The dreams specifically are that the wine steward says, "I dreamt I had 3 clusters of grapes, and I squeezed them into a cup, and I was suddenly serving Pharaoh this cup of wine." And Joseph says, "Well, that's great, because the 3 clusters are 3 days, and in 3 days you're going to be released, and you're actually going to have this job again." And then the former baker says, "Well, I had a dream too. I dreamt that I had 3 baskets on my head, and each one was filled with pastries and baked goods and bread. And all the birds came and picked the pastries and the breads out of the baskets." And Joseph said, "Well, it's not so good for you. I'm sorry to tell you, but the 3 baskets are 3 days, and within 3 days, you're going to be hung, and the birds are going to pick the flesh off your head. Sorry. And this is exactly what happens. And as the butler is being prepared to leave the prison, Joseph says to him, "Remember me to Pharaoh." The butler is then back in his capacities serving the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh himself is met with dreams that he can't interpret. And there's some interpretation that he himself in his sleep understood the dreams, but when he woke up, he couldn't remember them anymore. So every interpretation that he would hear, he was in some sort of a position to interpret whether or not it was correct or not, because it didn't ring that bell. Because there actually was a bell to ring, according to some interpretations. In any event, Pharaoh calls all his interpreters, his wise men, his magicians. No one gives him a satisfactory answer. And at that point, the wine steward says to him, "Look, I really hate to do this because it's going to remind you of my faults when I messed up before. So I really don't want to do this. But when I was in jail, there was a gentleman in the jail, and he interpreted what was going to happen to me exactly, and he interpreted what was going to happen to your former baker exactly. And that's the guy. And the information leaks down to the prison. Joseph is shaved and washed and prepared and given nice clothes. Once again, another cloak. He's brought before the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh says, "I got a dream. I got two dreams. No one can make heads or tail of them. I hear you interpret dreams." And Joseph says, "I don't interpret dreams. God interprets dreams, and he tells it to me." Okay. So the Pharaoh says, "I had two dreams, actually." Joseph says, "All right, tell me." So the first dream is, I saw 7 fat cows coming up out of the Nile. And right behind these 7 fat cows were 7 thin, starving cows. Ribs were showing, empty udders, nothing. And the 7 thin cows consumed the 7 fat cows, and they were no fatter for the meal. Then I had a second dream. I saw 7 ears of corn, thick, full, bursting with full kernel corn. And behind them rose up 7 thin, blasted, empty ears of corn, dry. And the 7 empty ears ate up the 7 thick, full, fat ears of corn, and they were no fatter for the meal. What does this mean? So Joseph tells him, well, Pharaoh's dream, the 2 dreams are one. God told you this 2 times in a row to make sure, to let you know that he really means it. Number 1, the 7 fat cows and the 7 fat ears of corn represent 7 years of plenty for Egypt. 7 years of plenty are on their way. Endless yields, tons of hay. Your farms will boom. After that, the future doesn't look so bright. 7 years will follow, and everything will completely change. The land will be poor. It will yield nothing. And that is the meaning of your dream. 7 full, fat years, followed by 7 lean, empty years that will be so lean and so empty that there will be no sign of the fatness that had preceded it. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, "What do I do?" And Joseph answers back, "You must find a wise man who will help Pharaoh store up during the time of fullness for that 7 years, so that when the times of leanness come, the Pharaoh has prepared himself and the land for the 7 thin years. But who this man will be, I do not know." And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, you are the man. And you'll be like me. Only in this seat over here am I going to have more authority than you. In other words, when you talk, as far as everyone's concerned, it's the same as me talking. No one's going to be able to pick up his hand, pick up his foot without you saying so. That's how authoritative you're going to be, starting immediately. So the Pharaoh takes off his ring. This tradition is very old and very common in the ancient world, going right up to and through Rome. And he puts it on the finger of Joseph, and he gives him, once again, a royal covering, royal robe. And now Joseph is in charge of this entire project. Joseph saves Egypt. Joseph saves his family. Joseph saves the future. Joseph enriches the Pharaoh. Everything Joseph does from this point forward prospers himself, the country he lives in, the country he comes from, his king, and his family. Very hard to outperform a record like that. How did this happen? Because he was completely prepared the entire time. First, he has a management job in the field, then a management job in the office, and finally a government job. Timing was perfect. Anyway, I guess that's when this ends. Now you got the point.